Sharifi, lecturer at the Department of Linguistics. I'm president of the Kurdish American Education Society. From the very outset, let me express my profound gratitude to our distinguished guests for accepting wholeheartedly to be a part of this timely forum during a critical time. I also appreciate the co-sponsorship of multiple departments and student associations on campus, including anthropology, Middle Eastern studies, political science, journalism, and mass communication, geography, international studies, multicultural center, Persian Student Association, History Student Association, Anthropology Student Association, and Anthropology Graduate Student Association. Hopefully I did not skip. Some of us may wonder why this forum, and why is it significant after all? All of us to different degrees are aware of the gravity and colossal tragedy that is plaguing both Syria and Iraq in a series of deepening and intractable crises. And all this is a departure from and degeneration of the collective call for political transformation and democratization in the Middle East that began with the so-called Arab Spring, and some people call it Kurdish awakening. Our ability to understand what appears to be murky and mysterious depends on our knowledge of the shifting political landscape. Both Iraq and Syria are now entangled in senseless acts of sectarian violence and in competing confluence of internal-external conflicts between state and non-state actors, all clashing for hegemonic rule in an area that has historically been one of the cultural hubs of ethnic, linguistic, and religious diversity. The timing of this forum reminds us of an uncertain and precarious future. The Islamic State is threatening any semblance of peace and stability. ISIS, with its pernicious ideology, has brought an endless trail of deaths, displacements, and destructions. More recently, Kurds have borne the brunt of ISIS genocidal war. The Kurdish Yazidis, followers of an ancient Mesopotamian religion in North Iraq, have escaped their historical homeland from the ruthless onslaught and are now at the brink of extinction. Similarly, hundreds of thousands of other minorities and inhabitants of Kobani in Syrian Kurdistan have fled and joined almost 4 million of Syrians and Iraqi refugees. Yesterday, the UN announced that it had halted food supplies to Syrian refugees because it had run out of funds. The city of Kobani has been under siege for more than 2 months now. The international coalition formed has not succeeded in halting the raging genocidal war. And the region is descending into more chaos and disasters. All of us are aware of the breadth and richness of the history of the Middle East and its diversity. Peoples living in these regions have been more tolerant of each other than what we witness now. This rich diversity can and must be the source of strength and not that of sectarian violence. Eventually, mutual understanding and respect among the peoples of the region can save the Middle East and its people from the horrific spectacles that we have witnessed. I am pleased that this forum will provide a multi-layered understanding of the current crises. This forum, as an occasion to share knowledge and ideas, is offered in the spirit of contributing to an understanding and recognizing the diversity of the Middle East. Our distinguished guests today will provide illuminating information about the various aspects of the current crisis. I hope we can shed some light on some of the challenges that the Syrian and Iraqi peoples face in their effort to build a democratic and plural society. Let me now turn our attention to the program and my colleague, Dr. Danny Piskin, who will introduce the program sequence and content.
Hi everyone, can you guys hear me in the back? I'm usually not a big mic fan and I talk in really loud, long classes, so I thought this would work. Basically, as Professor Sharifi explained, we have a packed program today. We're going to include a few keynote speakers that are going to talk first. Either you're going to be on stage with us, or you're going to be coming from pretty far away over Skype to talk to you guys. After those are concluded, we're going to go into a roundtable where we have quite a number of professors that are going to come and talk about different topics to you. So without further delay, and because I know our first speaker is actually waiting for us over Skype, our first speaker is actually Gerard Russel, who is a researcher and author of the book Heirs to Forgotten Kingdoms, Journeys into the Disappearing Religions of the Middle East.
Hello, yes, we are all here waiting for you. Thank you for coming to us from Oman. Most of us are aware of the major contribution that you have made to our knowledge about religious minorities in the Middle East, which I would characterize as the ethnography of endangered religions. Anyway, we would appreciate your insight into what motivated you to look at this rather perilous topic, and how you basically see the current state of these religious minorities.
Thank you, Amir. I think we're literally on the other side of the world from each other. But anyway, it's a very great pleasure to be speaking with you over Skype. I was drawn to this subject because of many years in which I lived in the Middle East and had a great interest and enthusiasm for the history of the Middle East. Can you hear me clearly?
We are now adjusting the volume. If you could hold for a moment. Just a moment. Could you talk so that we test it?
Yes, carry on speaking. Can you hear me clearly now?
I do. It's just the auditorium sound, which is not... Could you talk?
Yes, certainly.
Great.
Oh, good, all right, that's very good. Well, Amir, I was saying that I lived in the Middle East for many years. And I had a great interest already in ancient history and philosophy because that's what I studied at university. So in Britain, I followed a very traditional syllabus, which is called Literae Humaniores, the humanities, which is the study of Latin and the work of the Romans and the Greeks. And in my time in the Middle East, I saw certain continuities and commonalities between the culture of the Middle East and what might seem very, very different Greece and Rome. So that was the first thing that intrigued me. And then the second was that when I went to live in Cairo, Jerusalem, Baghdad, I kept encountering these which to me were extremely interesting because they had preserved ancient ways of thought, ideas, customs, which had died out elsewhere. And, you know, in these remote parts of the region had survived. And I found that not only interesting in a kind of dry way, but I actually found it very uplifting, spiritually, to be honest. Of diversity in the Middle East. So often when you look at it from the outside, the region looks as though it's extremely monochrome. When looked at closely, it turns out to be full of extraordinary dynamism in some ways, philosophical dynamism. And these religions are often what remains of the ideological, philosophical dynamism of the past. Can I check whether you're hearing me clearly?
Sure. We are basically, yeah, we see you and we hear you.
Good, excellent. So that really, I mean, is an answer to your question, I hope. I'm just going to put on some headphones.
Okay.
Which may make, because it means there won't be the feedback of sound.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, really, that was the answer to the question. And so, as I described, it was the fact that amazing preserved through these religious communities, the fact that they the diversity of the Middle East, in contrast to sometimes the way that it can seem to a superficial eye, and for that matter, the interest of these ideas themselves, which I think deserve to be taken seriously. And in the book I try to analyse those ideas and show what merit they have and take them seriously.
So it seems to me that basically it is really a very difficult subject to explore, as even the followers and their neighbors basically find these religions very indecipherable and mysterious and almost enigmatic. I wonder, if this posed a methodological difficulty for you to gather basically information from the emic perspective of the followers of these religions. And if you could talk more specifically about Yazidis, since they have been more the object of deliberate genocidal war, we would appreciate any information you may have.
Sure. Well, first off, it poses great difficulties, of course, that these religions are so secretive. It means that it is much harder to be definitive about what they believe. Even they themselves disagree. So it's very hard, actually, the Yazidis in particular, do not ever give one single account of their religion. And the difficulty for anyone who is writing about them is to say, which account of the religion will I privilege? Because all, in a sense, have a validity. And that makes it very hard. If you've got many, many people who tell you Yazidism is this or that, how do you choose between them and say this is what it really is and those other versions are wrong? I think in many ways, though, a key to understanding these religions is to look back to the philosophy of the religions of the Middle East before Christianity and Islam. So it is to look back to an era when Greek philosophy was immensely important, as almost, you could say, the religion of the region. And I think when one grasps that and sees that when Shahrastani and Biruni describe for us the religion of Haran, which was famous in their time, around 1,000 years ago, in Biruni's case, as the last bastion of paganism, if you like, then you see that really they were deeply influenced in Haran by Greek philosophy of a certain kind. Actually, when I say Greek, we call it Greek. It was certainly part of Greek culture, but Greek culture then was just as much part of what we call the Middle East as it was part of Europe. And Pythagoras, who was one of the philosophers, we hardly know about him in the West today, but he's very popular among the Druze, and I suspect we'll find him in the Yazidi religion as well, certainly found among the Alawites. Took many of his ideas from the Middle East. He travelled to Iraq, travelled to Egypt, or claimed to have done so. And his father was allegedly born in Tyre. So you have a connection with what we would call Lebanon. Now, if you look back to that era, the era of Neoplatonism, then you'll discover there a number of themes which you will also find in the religion of the Druze and the Alawites, and to some extent the Yazidis. So you will find there, for example, a belief in one God that is unknowable. The Druze don't refer to God as Allah on the whole, they refer to him as creator of the universe. And actually not quite creator of the universe, but rather cause of the causes of the universe. And that's a very important point, because what the Greeks believed in was a God that was much more remote than the Christian or Muslim traditional view of God. Not one who acted in the world, one that was the source of being in a rather sort of philosophical, unhuman kind of sense. And so when you look at these religions and you see that what they believe in is a God that's so remote, as the Yazidis put it, that they don't really think about that, about God at all. Or when you see even Muslim philosophers like Al-Kirmani saying that God is so remote from our understanding that we cannot hope to address our prayers and devotion to God, but rather instead to intermediary beings. It kind of helps to make sense of why the Yazidis, for example, believe in Malak Ta'uz. They address their prayers and reverences to a being who is not God, but they regard as an angel. But a lot of these pre-Islamic ideas, in which really the ancient gods became not exactly angels, but beings that were intermediate between God and man, kind of found a bit of a kind of compromise with Islamic Christianity, in the sense that, if you call Malak Ta'uz an angel, the peacock angel, as his name means, right, it's a more acceptable thing to say. And I don't mean to say that the Yazidis are worshipping Malak Ta'uz as a god, but at some point in history, the transition has been made. It's a bit like in Europe. Obviously, some of the properties of the ancient gods were given to figures like the Virgin Mary. It wasn't, I don't wish to say that it was a sort of simplistic thing in which ancient pagan cults kind of were adopted in Islam or made Islamic, but rather that there was a sort of slow elision between the two. Understanding that context made it a bit easier to sort of decipher some of the slightly puzzling things. One of the most puzzling being that the Alawites and Druze specifically, and the Yazidis, believe in two things that are quite baffling when you first come across them. One is reincarnation. The Druze believe, they being the most open about this really, that they, the Druze, are a people who have been reincarnated over the generations into new bodies, but their souls are eternal. And that means that they can be, in a sense, the same people as those who existed 1,000 years ago or longer ago. And that has serious, social implications. It also has very interesting philosophical implications. So that's one thing that comes from that belief. And so the Yazidis have a really odd, to the outsider, idea If you go to Lalish, which is their shrine, about 2 hours journey north of Erbil in what's now Kurdistan, you'll see, at first it really looks very Islamic, because what you have there is a shrine with a lot of Arabic writing, and the names of the people that are said to be buried there sound like Sufi preachers. They have names like Shamsuddin. Sheikh Adi bin Musafir, the founder of the Yazidi religion, was a Muslim missionary, apparently. There certainly was a man of that name who was, according to contemporaries, a genuine Sufi thinker. And he really did go to that area to try and apparently convert people to Islam. The Yazidis don't accept that account of him at all. They say that he was an earthly manifestation of Malak Tauz. And again, that's not totally divorced from the idea that the Druze
this was,
and the...
during
yes.
what century exactly?
12th century.
12th century. But they do go back, as you said, to ancient times. Could you tell us approximately how many years when it comes to the origin of Yazidis?
Well, it would be... the oldest human literature is 4,100 years old, so that's the Epic of Gilgamesh. We don't have any other written source or anything composed by humans that is older. And that refers to a ceremony of bull sacrifice, which was carried out at that time in southern Iraq, to the god Shamash. And the Yazidis today, I mentioned that they have these apparently Muslim figures, Shamsuddin, whom they call Sheikh Shams. And every year, a bull is sacrificed at the tomb of Sheikh Shams. And it's very clear that this custom is the same as the ancient bull sacrifice conducted to the god Shamash. As I said, there was this transition between when things were called gods to when they were given new, more acceptable names and identities. In addition to that, Malak Tauz is a really complex concept. As you may know, Malak Tauz is both the angel, whom we call Lucifer, who rebelled, or Iblis in the Islamic tradition, rebels against God and is cast down into hell. The Yazidis say that he repented and was restored to favor. So there's a philosophical explanation and for that, but also Malak Tauz is revered in the form of a bronze bird figure, which Yazidis kiss is part of their ritual. And similar bird figures, we know, were revered in ancient Babylon and Assyria, at least 3,000 years ago. So that again, there's clearly an inheritance from the remote past, given a new guise, given a philosophical guise that explains it, justifies it, but it's the ancient custom.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the information. The current plight of Yazidis is worrisome. Some basically underestimate the magnitude of their problems. How do you characterize their plight? Would you say that they are seriously now in danger as a religious minority after what happened to them?
Yes, I mean, to understand the situation of the Yazidis, they are scattered across many countries, partly because they were caught up in one of the other great persecutions of the 20th century and indeed in the 19th century. They were they were many times massacred by the Ottoman Empire. And in the course of these, the last of which coincided with the Armenian genocide, many Yazidis ended up in Armenia and Georgia, while the large majority or the plurality of the religion were in Iraq. And now that Iraq, which is the historical center of the religion, has the great shrine of Lalish, is no longer seen by them as a safe place to be. When I was in August in northern Iraq again to see the Yazidis, they were very clear, all of the ones I met, all of the refugees, that they want to leave, they don't want to stay. the consequence of this is they always had a place in Sinjar, right up in the northwest corner of Iraq, where they were safe. In a sense, they were sort of not safe in the sense that Saddam got up there, moved them from their villages, corralled them into settlements where they were dependent on the government. But they existed there for centuries and centuries. Now it's been proven to be completely vulnerable. About 10,000 remain on the mountain of Sinjar, in inaccessible villages. So they won't be completely extinct, not even in 5 or 10 years in Iraq. But they will, I think, the majority of them will be trying to leave. And when a people decides to leave their country, they often succeed. And what I think that will mean is that we will see a great diminishing of that ancient cultural heritage and great suffering for the individual, as their religion is important to them, the community is important to them, and it's very hard to keep together when you move to many different parts of the world. They have very complex religious rules which restrict them in whom they can marry, much more restrictive than Islam or Christianity, actually. And that makes it really, really hard for them because they can't just any other, they have to marry people who actually belong to their caste and their particular.
Okay.
So they face great practical problems.
So you basically consider their situation to be more vulnerable and precarious than any time in modern or ancient history.
Very, very bad time in the 1890s when they were massacred in great numbers.
Yes.
But I think this is indeed perhaps more worrying, because the truth is that now the weapons that their enemies have are so much more powerful, and the instinct to migrate is so much stronger that I wonder whether the community would want to remain. And that's what I think is now much of, it's possible the group's entire, in a way they never did in the past. Even though the past was sometimes horribly violent, and especially the Ottoman era. But this is a different time, because the power of the state is very different now from what it was 100 years ago.
Okay, thank you very much. Heirs to Forgotten Kingdoms is a marvelous scientific and anthropological contribution that I'm sure our audience would be keenly interested in reading to find out all these details. In a minute or so, if you could basically wrap up the essence of what you had to say. Hopefully we'll have you in person here in the near future.
Well, I hope so, Amir. I mean, what I would is, first off, there are many traditions that have survived for thousands of years in the Middle East. To show something about the history, how Muslims and non-Muslims have interacted, because we shouldn't assume that it's always been the history of conflict. It's obvious from the survival of these religions that over 10 million people in the Middle East practice forms of religion that are not Islam. That clearly it has been possible for people to coexist, and they have done, particularly in the modern era. And you know, what I think particularly I found in the book uplifting is that, to tell the truth, that the lessons for coexistence that we can take for the Middle East are taken from its own history, not from European history or anywhere else, from even 20th and 19th century history, when people did live together, people could accept each other. And that is, in my view, when the Middle East was at its height, was when people could live together and accept each other. And I hope that the book can inspire some more of that coexistence.
I'm sure it would. Thank you very much. I know it is too late, early hours of the morning, and you should be in bed now.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Goodbye.